Hello, and welcome to another edition of Through a Therapist's Eyes. This is where you get to get personal insights directly from a therapist in time in your car or time in your personal home. I am Chris Gazdick. I've been doing therapy since 1995 in some form or another. We are pushing up close to 200 episodes, Adam.
Cool.
Adam is with us. He is over there. You are back. It's been a minute, man.
Yep, been a while.
Where you been? What have you been doing?
Let's see. Worked on the kitchen a little bit. Got granite countertops put in finally.
They look fantastic.
Look good.
Jealous of those, I must say.
Yeah, my girlfriend helped me out with get the walls ready and everything. Now we just got to pick the wall color out and get the rest of it knocked out.
You're like metamorphosizing your whole house with your deck, your kitchen.
Yeah.
You know, when are you going to go with the floors?
Which floors?
All of them.
Well, see, since all of them were replaced when I first bought the house, that's on the last thing on the agenda. There's other stuff I haven't touched yet. It has to be replaced first, and then I'll touch that.
If you need any help, let me know.
Okay.
This is where you see the world through the lens of a therapist, but being aware is not to deliver your therapy services in any way. Help us out, and we thank you for listening. We have become an international podcast. We really enjoy doing the show. I really appreciate you guys joining us, hanging out with us. Understand this show you make this show go. 5-star reviews on Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. Apple, iTunes particularly allows us to receive worded messages. I actually have a plan to ask somebody specifically to give us a review this week. So match him. Give us a review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps us to spread the word. So this is the human emotional experience. We do endeavor to figure this thing out together. I have an interesting topic, I think, today that plays off of, you weren't here, but we did a current event with the Uvalde events over there in Texas. Crazy stuff. Mm-hmm. Have you been tracking that story at all?
No, but I heard a little bit about it, but
yeah. Tuned out a little bit for your own mental health, maybe. Mm-hmm. I've actually been kind of talking about that. Like, dude, we need to learn how to get away from the heavy coverage that we get, in today's day.
It's almost impossible now. I mean, it's always everything's all around you.
It seems that way, but honestly, if you operate like maybe you've heard of it, but you're not all dialed into it. I think we need to learn how to not be inundated in our own world, creating anxiety and overwhelmed feelings. But anyway, I talked about that at length. I'm not going to talk about that as much today, but I thought playing off that, I was looking at the topic today, and I just got a lot of content lists that I go by. And I came across this topic that's on my list for a little while. This actually came from a physician assistant that was doing a placement with me from the good Gardner-Webb University program over there. Little plug for Gardner-Webb. I'm a preceptor for them, and she actually brought it up, and I was like, what is broken heart syndrome? I don't think that I've ever heard of it before. She had brought it up. Have you ever heard of the broken heart syndrome?
I mean, I think everyone's heard of broken heart, but
yeah.
I don't think I've actually heard of broken heart syndrome.
Because it's being found to be like a thing.
So it's a real thing?
It's a real thing. And so back to the Uvalde thing, I actually saw McConaughey give it was an impassioned speech. I mean, like him or not like him, like the policies or not like the policies, doesn't matter. He gave a really impressive speech where he went down onto the real people that were affected by that. And so one of the people that were killed was the teacher. So there were 2 teachers that were killed. Well, one of the teachers that was married, the woman was going to do, it was part of his impassioned speech, but the woman did summer school, and the funds that she got from summer school, one year painted the front of the house, and then last year she did summer school, painted the side of the house. And this husband and wife did it together. And so this teacher was going to work summer school again, and those funds were intended to do the backside of the house. And I thought it was cool the way that they talked about that, because that was obviously a close relationship that they had working that project together and living life together. And, of course, they're just married for however many years. Well, the husband died after the wife was killed at the Uvalde event. And I think that it is said, if not was it said, I would propose, is it possible? He died from this broken heart syndrome. It's a real thing. So that's an interesting tie-in to the current event that we're all watching and, involved with in our minds. So I thought we need to talk about that. We need to talk about what it is, how it works. Is this really like, what's the deal?
Well, I've heard of somebody who's married like 56 years and the wife dies and 12 hours later the husband dies or something like that. So I guess that's the same thing then?
I think so, because that, like I said, this student that brought this to me when she was on her practicum, that was this year. Maybe it was Katie. I mean, I think it was this last year or the one before her, and I see 2 a year. So in our folklore, in our discussions, we've heard of this. We've heard of people, once an elderly couple dies, the other one dies. But why is the question? And there are some real things. So check this out. This comes from the Mayo Clinic. It's a temporary heart condition that is often brought on by stressful situations and extreme emotions. That's essentially what the broken heart syndrome is. Now, I'm not a medical person, but they go on and describe the real specific things that go on that are different from a heart attack. So the condition can be triggered by a serious physical illness or surgery. People with broken heart syndrome may have sudden chest pain and think they're having a heart attack. So this has also been called stress cardiomyopathy. I can't pronounce this one well. Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, or it must be atypical. That's got to be a typo. Apical ballooning syndrome. APICAL.
We need my girlfriend here right now.
We do. Where's she at, Julie? We need some professional help on this.
Click off the terms.
Technical help, Julie. Email us in. Get on this Facebook Live. So this it literally feels evidently like a heart attack. It's issues with your heart pumping that is really pretty much affected by this. And so with a heart, well, I think I have it later on, but I remember it was fascinating because they talked about, like, with a heart attack, you have real blockages. But people will die from a cardiac event feeling as though they're having a heart attack, but there's no blockages. And we can test that. We could look at that.
So it's like an event that causes a disruption in your body and just...
It's fascinating to me, right?
That's pretty wild.
It's fascinating where... I mean, we talk about the physiological realities that we have in our body are tied to the mental health and the emotional factors. I mean, we're finding out just more and more how linked they are. And I'm fascinated by that because there's the chicken and the egg type thing that happens, I think, there. Sometimes I really have to practice outside of my scope. Like, talk about through a therapist's eyes, it's frustrating because I'm not a medical doctor. I don't have a lot of medical expertise, but I really will find that I have to practice out of my scope because there are unexplained medical realities that I see with my clients that we talk about, and we figure out the mental stress and strains and some of the idiosyncrasies that are in their life, and their medical condition gets better, man. It's kind of crazy to think that happens that way. I mean, can emotions cause a heart attack? Well, yeah.
Apparently so.
Apparently so. So let me see. What else did I get about this? So an excellent example. Oh, yeah, I talked about the Uvalde person. So here's some interesting risk factors that come with this. And Adam, I know you're not a medical professional, right? And you're not a therapist either, but I'm curious, like...
But I play one on TV. No,
as you went to the Holiday Inn yesterday. I'm curious how this plays in your mind as you hear some of this, because to me, this blows my mind a little bit, even being a therapist, that really our feelings and emotions can be that impactful, right? But they do identify some risk factors. So mental health / physical health connection is really exemplified, I feel like, about through this. I wonder, is this all about hormones? That's my own thought. But there is a suspicion that I'm creating from this because I've talked about that on the show, before. But they identify adrenaline explodes in your system, and cortisone is another stress hormone that explodes in your system. And the thought is that can actually cause restrictions. And during these extreme circumstances, wouldn't it make sense that your body, your heart rhythms, your heart pumping, your heart process is going to be greatly affected when you're like totally distraught and in a discerned state? So I wonder about our emotional systems throwing out hormones that have direct impact on the physical process.
Sounds feasible.
This sounds feasible?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, so they say we know that physical and emotional events clearly, precede cardiac events when this happens. There's also some mention about drug interactions as a possible effects here as well. They cite severe allergic reactions. They cited asthma attacks, anxiety medications, actually medications for anxiety, nasal decongestants, and of course illicit drugs. So all of those are also risk factors that go into this. So the way I kind of see this is you got a little bit of a hodgepodge of things going on. Maybe some of these risk factors, a major event in your life, coupled with major mental health preceding realities, and I'm coming to that in a little bit. Other possible risk factors, they kind of say there's more women than men that affects this. I actually completely doubt that.
I was just getting ready to say the same thing.
Why?
Well, I mean, I'm thinking that, men, for example, a lot of times they don't go to the doctor anyway.
Right.
So maybe women are being more diagnosed with it than men.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, because you wouldn't. Yeah, that's true. I think that's true too. I think I was taking the angle. I don't know why we still carry this stupid myth and belief that women are more emotional than men, and I think we've kind of talked about that on the show many times over. I think we're all equally emotional all the time. We just demonstrate it, show it, in different ways and to different levels. So that's the angle I was taking. But they also cite low blood pressure, irregular heartbeats, heart failure, and potential blood clots that you already have issues with. So it just seems to me that if you've already got a little bit of cardiac kind of reality, and then you go through a really, really horrifying reality. I mean, look, I've made the statement before. I feel like when people go through the loss of a loved one, when a close fiance or dating partner, even in high school, certainly a marriage partner ends, I anecdotally experience that as being at your worst emotional state.
Right.
You're most decompensated. You're most dysregulated with emotion. Like, you are a mess. More so than most anything else I've kind of found, in life for the most part.
Well, when you were mentioning about the hormones, I was thinking about, it's going to sound silly, I was thinking about a car. Okay, so
this is a car guy.
Yes, car guy. So just hear me out. So
okay, let's see what you
got. Have a car and it's wore out. It needs oil change and everything else. It's got conditions, pre-existing conditions, we'll put it like that, and you decide you're going to race with it.
You're going to race?
You're going to race.
Okay, that makes sense.
So what's the chances?
Makes total sense. I'm with you.
What's the chances of having some kind of catastrophic problem with your car when your car is not in the best shape it could be?
Absolutely.
Same way.
And a lot of people take old cars, fix them up, do whatever. You have pre-existing conditions and things that already are kind of at play.
Right.
In addition to a really intense, racing, man, you're gonna RPM it up, you're gonna jam it, you're gonna you want to put some nitro in it or whatever. You are asking for trouble. So I think it's a perfect metaphor. I think it's a perfect analogy. Let's go a little further with this. Like, think about this now. Let's go in depth on some of the emotional factors. This was my own brainstorming, okay, that makes this broken heart syndrome kind of stick out as a little bit more of a reality to me. Fear, grief, extreme anger, surprise. These are some of the things that these folks at Johns Hopkins kind of highlighted. But I went further with that. What about other really complicated life circumstances? Now, please, by the way, this is almost theoretical, hypothetical on my part, brainstorming. But I think that if like I'd love to have a neurologist in a room and a medical cardiac doctor and like and Nurse Julie to see like, you know, what would they all think about this? Because my piece is the mental health piece. And these things that I thought about listed, man, they're like really involved, depthy things that you might not screen out. Resentments that are unresolved. So think about that. If you have a loved one that you've been married to for a long time, or things have been kind of going on in your life together, and you just haven't really worked things out, and you have a strong state of resentments that might be there, and then boom, they die all of a sudden. What does that leave you with? I mean, that just creates some churning. Like now I've got to be grieving and dealing with loss, and I never really got to say some of the things I wanted to say, or the opposite. I know they resented me. There was problems that were there. It's not gonna come out of the room. Nobody in the public's gonna know that, but
Right.
that creates a churning comes to mind, right? Like a powerful, stuck, chronic. What do you do with that?
Well, I guess it depends on the person. I guess in some cases, somebody would get better, and some people would get even worse.
How would you say better?
Well, I mean, if you have, like, say you have a relationship and you have a lot of resentment, and
Yeah.
they pass away.
Yeah.
Now you have all that resentment toward them. Some people would handle it; they don't have to worry about it anymore. And
Okay.
and some people would be like, "I never got to tell that person how miserable they made my life."
Yeah.
Or it just depends on how they dealt with it.
Or not even. I'm glad you said it that way. I think you're right. People will deal with that in some ways. Some points it's going to be the end of the road, and I don't have to worry about it anymore. Other people need to or miss the opportunity to express.
Yeah, tell them.
and this is in a loving relationship. So this is almost like guilt. Like I feel like they resented me, and I'm totally in love, and now we can't deal with this. Or I have a resentment. And we could have been in a better position because I really wanted things. I don't think it's, they were miserable. I was miserable, and now it's.
Well, I mean, it depends on what the relationship was.
It does.
It does.
I think this can be a potential, like, seriously needs to be studied risk factor. Another one, let's look at. How about past trauma? We talk about trauma brain, and we know that trauma responses are ingrained. So we've talked about the limbic system and trauma realities in people's lives. Well, it stands to me that would be an involved emotional risk factor in this horrible state that you've already been in. This is traumatic. Uvalde, or, my wife was killed at a bank robbery event, or even just a really bad car accident. Like, that's trauma, right? So if we're looking at risk factors, I think you have to look at the past traumatic realities that a person has had to see, like, wow, we need to really make sure you're okay because you have past trauma, and now you just went through this, and you're telling me you have heart attack symptoms. That to me is a risk factor, right? How about extreme anger? Okay, well, yeah. When somebody dies, this is kind of more about like, you made my life miserable, or I was really like had a lot of anger states. Well, now you think of broken heart syndrome as being, I'm super sad, and now I'm, widower or widow, and, but I would submit there's also a factor of like extreme anger that now you've left me alone with these kids as well. You've died. And I think that level of totally unresolved, talk about adrenaline rush, talk about, cortisol that just gets way overproduced. I think that's a pretty interesting risk factor when it comes to potentially your spouse dies, and now we're concerned about you with your cardiac reality. Marital problems left unaddressed. I think that's, that's been inferred in some of this stuff. But now you can't do anything about it. You can't, really resolve this. You can't really understand this. And John Hopkins, what did they list? They listed guilt, fear, extreme anger, surprise. How about extreme confusion? Like if you had things that were going on that you never really figured out, and now this happens, and all this system, you get into a swirl. I mean, I'm telling you,
now you can't talk about it.
Nothing. No, you can't talk about it with the person because they've died.
That's what I'm saying.
But who are you supposed to talk about it with that's living because you don't want to, right? You don't want to, you want to protect their image or protect their memory. I mean, you're supposed, it's a mess. I'm telling you, I think people get into a messy state. Fears, intense fear. I have had people that I've talked to in therapy that enter into like a panic state of like, what am I supposed to do now as a single parent? How do I operate in life now? I have a person I'm talking to now that's right in the middle of that. And it's like, whew, it gets real fast. That's a quote, Neil. It gets real fast. Can that be on a pillow? He's like smirking at me. That's not going to work, evidently.
He's going to stitch it up tonight.
He stitched it up.
He's going to crochet it.
Yeah, I'm talking about on the merch list with our pillows and mugs and this type of thing. But it does. It gets real fast when things suddenly happen. And then you might not be real rational when you start thinking about what is my budget going to be? How am I going to manage this income that's lost, particularly if, the spouse was the breadwinner? You think that people don't get panicked about that? I'm going to tell you they do.
Oh, yeah.
And now you throw that into the broken heart syndrome. Again, all of these are like my list and thoughts about like total risk factors. Can I live alone? I don't know that I can live this way. That's I've lived with this person for 55 years. I think that's the cultural thing, that we talked about.
Plus the total mass of thinking about all these things. Confusion.
Multiples at once. I didn't even think about that. You're right. These are risk factors, right? If you have 1, 2, 3 of these things kind of popping at the same time that some big loss happens, oh my gosh. Totally. I think you're right. Untapped grief. We're going to talk a little bit more about grief here in the next segment. We'll talk about that in a little bit more in depth. I'm going to leave that alone for now. And then confusion, how to maintain current life for self or those that I'm responsible for. I'm panicked. I'm not a good enough parent. I'm not a good enough, caretaker of my elderly parents, or we were caring for her parents and then they died. So I have to jump in and manage that. How do I deal with these relationships? Like,
I can't deal with this right now and everything else.
This is involved and you're supposed to be just grieving your loss. This is a lot to handle. I can't only imagine what people would feel like. Again, when something loses, you're already in your heaviest decompensated state, plus these risk factors. I think you can understand a little bit more if I'm drawing this out. Does this make sense? Like, what are you hearing with this? This sounds to me, and the more I even talk about it, very, very real, very, very possible.
Risk factor, like you said.
Yeah.
Just pile it on, different stuff on there.
Have you ever thought of this when you heard of? Well, you never really heard of empty broken heart syndrome in the first place.
I think we've all kind of thought this before. I mean, it's been kind of ingrained in our whole culture. You're watching a movie or something, and something happens, and somebody has a heart attack, or something happens, and a woman faints, or whatever. There's always these things where something traumatic happens, and it causes something. So I don't think it sounds far fetched at all.
I think it's a bit of a new medical reality that never has really been addressed before. This is totally random, but it's interesting. I was listening to a podcast about SIDS, sudden infant death. We have no idea what causes that. We have no idea really an understanding of that medically at all. I heard them talking about it in the 90s. Remember when babies it was suggested, back time, stomach time rather, take all the things out of the crib.
Right.
Those were attempts to minimize sudden infant death, and evidently that decreased.
Is it the same thing as crib death or different?
Probably same thing.
Okay.
Probably the same thing. It decreased the numbers, but the numbers since then have remained exactly the same. And what they deduced is, hey, you know what? this hasn't changed sudden infant death syndrome. That was suffocating infants that had died. It's a totally different thing than SIDS. So they took that component out, and we still don't explain SIDS. What just occurred to me that I wonder if some of this can be related to SIDS. When babies go through this emotional turmoil for whatever reason it might be. We know that babies do die. We've talked about it before when we talked about emotion-focused therapy and attachment problems. You don't have emotional support. You don't have emotional nurturing, enough care and love. You're neglected. Babies will die. That's amazing. So I'm actually realizing as I'm talking about this, I wonder if this is a part of the SIDS issue that has not been able to be figured out. Like, dude, I want to call those guys up, those professionals, and have that conversation, because I think that's real. I think that's potentially true. That's, like I said, real in the moment.
You're going to schedule a doctor appointment just to talk to them about this stuff, aren't you?
Cardiac people, look out, man. I'm coming to you. I think so. So this is just an interesting thing that I think has been a bit of a mystery that I wanted to talk about, and that's I'm not. That's about what I know and understand about it, and a lot of it was from the articles that I was kind of looking up. The rest of this, I think we're going to talk about grief, but I thought this was interesting. So any therapists out there listening or people in the field, I'm going to make I want to recognize, wow, I don't think our mental health field is on the touchstones with this at all. Meaning, I haven't heard any kind of conferences about this. I don't hear many therapists talking about it. I don't know that the field of psychology has done a lot of research on this. I think this is really, really very much new ground that I would love to hear. I mean, if you're therapists that are out there listening to this, I would really ask you to call in or email in or put some on the comments that we have here on the live, because this is a medical field driven thing. I feel like even the term, I think doctors and pediatricians and the researchers that are looking into what happened with this heart condition, those specialists are leading the charge on this. Mental health profession, I don't think has much at all. I could be stoned to death by my own colleagues, but it surprises me because I think that we need psychology fields to be studying this. This is a big opportunity to bridge gaps between our whole two fields. So that's what I got. I got a lot more on grief, but that's what I got. What are you hearing? I'm just curious what you're thinking, if this is kind of all new or not.
Again, I don't think it's new. To me, it sounds totally reasonable. Like I mentioned a minute ago, like you saw movies and stuff and shows where it was kind of like accepted when somebody had a stressful event or whatever that they may have a heart attack, or calm down, you're going to have a heart attack, or something like that, or calm down, you're going to have a stroke, or whatever. I mean, it makes sense to me.
I guess so. Yeah,
it kind of makes sense that if there's other things that can be disruptive. I mean, we don't understand all the things that our human body does.
Yeah.
So I mean, it makes sense. I don't think it's far fetched or anything. I don't want to say it's totally new. It may not be completely understood to the point like it should be.
I guess it's interesting because when the physician assistant brought it up to me in it being a syndrome or a real thing that people research and that we know about, I thought about it in a clinical way in my mind. But it's cool to hear you say that, because prior to that, yeah, I thought about it in much the same way, I guess. It's talked about, it's mentioned with some of those comments that you just made, but I hadn't really thought about it clinically through my therapy eyes. I've just thought about it through, Chris's eyes, Chris's experience. Because you're right. Like, oh my God, be careful. They're going to have a heart attack. Like, chill out.
Yeah.
I've literally heard people say that at funerals and stuff, now that I'm thinking about it. But now we have research about it. We have legit science that's demonstrating this kind of stuff. So yeah, okay, cool. So let's switch gears. Let's talk a lot about grief and loss. We haven't done a whole show on grief and loss I Googled it and I was surprised. And I think I've said this a couple times because we've talked about grief on this show. And this episode here is going to be probably the closest that we get to it. So we probably need to pay attention to that, Neil, and maybe even make it a part of the title in some way. It occurs to me because grief and loss has come up in a few of the topics, but we haven't really talked as much about the grieving process. So, Adam, you've gone through losses.
Mm-hmm.
How do you grieve? What have you heard about the grieving process? You've heard movies. It's a process. It's not an event. There was a particular movie that was like making so fun of that. I thought it was funny. But it is a process. It isn't an event. How do you grieve? What do you do when you've gone through losses, if you would be willing to share?
Well, some people might want to talk to somebody about it. Some people might not want to talk about it at all. Some people may want to do things different. I don't know. I mean, everybody deals with grief a different way.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the things that you think people do to manage grief?
Distractions.
Definitely. Comes to mind.
Yeah, do something different to distract your mind. Get your mind off of it. It might be something, maybe not even different, something you haven't done in a while. We talked about video games a long time ago.
Oh, yeah.
It's been a long time to play video games. Time to do it again.
Well, it's funny, which you haven't, by the way. It makes me frustrated.
I knew that's where I was going.
What's that?
I knew that's where I was going.
Yes. What was I going to say? I had a thought and it left me. That's what it was. Yeah, the cornerstone of mental health comes up again, right? Self-care, fun, relaxing, enjoyable activities that aren't self-destructive in any way and that aren't work-related tasks. Throwing yourself into work, because people will do that to grieve, right? They'll just go work themselves to death. We do the self-destructive things. Anyone ever drank grief away before, you think?
Sure.
Absolutely. So self-care, though, distracting techniques, that's the cornerstone for a reason. I'm going to say something, and I'm sure you've heard this before, and I want to see if you can, how many of the 4 that you can get. You've heard of the 4 stages of grieving, right?
Okay.
Grief in stages, the 4 stages of grief. Never heard of that?
Maybe.
Any idea what they might be? This is Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's process with grieving. And
I would think acceptance would be one.
Be the last one, probably, yeah.
Dealing with grief. Coming to terms with it, that's kind of the same thing as acceptance.
Yep, that's one, Neil. He's whispering to him.
Yeah, he's saying denial in the background. He's saying denial.
Denial. What's the first one? There's denial, there's bargaining, and then there's acceptance. What's the first one, do you know? Anger sounds maybe right. Yeah, I think you might be right.
How do you mean bargaining?
The idea here is that you go through a process of grieving. It's Elizabeth Kubler-Ross is actually the originator of this, and the thought is that you go through these stages, and we can mark out these stages with what somebody's experiencing. And it's a good model. It makes sense. And you can see people doing this. I've got something better that we want to go to. But to answer your question, you do, I think Neil's right. You start out, or are you right? He's got the mic.
Yeah, it starts with denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance.
Okay.
That's more than 4.
They have 7, but this one listed as 5. And so, I've heard denial, anger, bargaining, or to me, I think I heard rationalizing or trying to process it, and then you finally get to acceptance.
Yeah. Well, so we got them in the wrong order, and they may have actually added to it. They probably added. I'm pretty sure that Elizabeth Kubler started off with 4, but nevertheless, you go through just anger stage, and then you'll go through a denial stage. Like this didn't really happen. I'm just, you return to your normal life. It's like, oh my gosh, and then you go into the bargaining where it's kind of like, a lot of times prayer, right? Like, Lord, if you just can this can be different. Life doesn't have to be this way. Then I'll never curse again or whatever. You kind of negotiate your way through. Like, I'm not really going to be a single parent. Any number of sort of negotiating things that you think of in your own head that all about like this just didn't really happen. I'm pissed off it didn't really happen. I'm denying it didn't really happen. I'm bargaining around this really happened. And then you get to a place of a stage where it's acceptance. Like, you know how people say it, like it hits you. Man, I knew she's died for like 3 weeks. I've kind of gone back to my world. I've been back to work, and then it hit me like a ton of bricks. And that's when you really get into like a painful reality of like, okay, this is really real. This is acceptance, and you move on kind of through life. I had just had somebody in therapy who's dealing with a pretty heavy grief experience right now, and he just hit the acceptance part really after he went back to his hometown to go through the process of the celebration of life. They've done the other things, and she's passed away, but it's like a an overwhelming rush of emotion. So those are the stages of grief. Some of that sounding familiar a little bit.
The bargaining thing just is.
You tripped out by that one?
Well, no, I don't get it, but okay.
Yeah, it's there. It's just not real when you go through the terrible loss of a mother whom you're really close to. And, of course, as we're talking about a spouse with broken heart. So we really want to understand the grieving process, and we really want to understand what the heck do you do to cope with this stuff. There's lots of questions. And evidently with the broken heart syndrome, the risks are high. Like, this is important. So if you're, first of all, listening to this and you've gone through some sort of loss recently, little pause here in the middle for hope. Like, you can get through this process. You can deal with this. Take a deep breath. You will gain stability and groundedness again. Life will never be the same, but you can develop, that new normal, as we say, to kind of get through to a peaceful place of existence after this huge loss. So that's the midpoint sort of, or 3/4 point sort of breathe, I got a totally different way of looking at grieving. Sound interesting? You
Sure.
gotta say yes.
Yep.
Excited about it?
Yes, I am.
Come on, man.
I'm ready to
buying
hear it. I'm ready to hear about it.
I use this actually as one of the few handouts that I pull out of my drawers because I don't use handouts and sheets very much. We probably ought to scan this and put it on our website so that you can have this, because this is a totally different way of experiencing grief and loss and how to go about it. So here's the backstory with this. I actually went to a conference that was a substance abuse conference, and it was for chronic relapsing, right? So people that are in recovery and they relapse again, and they get sober again and they relapse again, and they get sober again and they relapse again. Well, some smart dude or gal along the way figured out like, oh, well, that sounds like grief and loss, like they haven't let go of their relationship with drugs and alcohol, and they have to grieve that. And so if you don't grieve it, you can't let go of it, and that's why you relapse. Makes sense. And so they actually developed this different process, and they did this in their rehab facility like over and over and over again, and found great success with it. So I've actually taken this and adopted it to just losses that you have. And I've gone through this process with many people throughout the years in the therapy relationship. So let me go through Spitfire, and then we'll go through them so that you can begin to understand what do you do to manage this loss so you don't fall into the broken heart syndrome, okay? So the first step, well, first of all, too, these are tasks. These aren't steps. These aren't stages. They're tasks to go through a grief and loss event. And just right from the get-go, I kind of like that better too, because you can do them in any order. They're not really stages that you have to go through. And I don't know about you, but when I have tasks, I feel empowered because I can take action and do something. It really helps me to heal and recover right there from the get-go because I'm empowered to do something. So I love the idea that these are tasks to do in a grieving process rather than helplessly and disempowered, you're going to go through these stages, right? So these are tasks, and I think that's a cool concept right from the get-go. So go down through them. You define the loss, A. And then B, you explore the meaning and the impact of that loss. Okay. C, you identify the beauty of the bond before the loss, which I think is a cool concept that is a part of a task that you would want to do. D, you understand the cost of ungrieved loss. And then here's a really cool part. E, create a ritual to bring about and represent closure. Rituals are really important. Carry out the ritual with significant others present. Makes sense to progress towards that. And then find your own unique way or pace. I don't know if that's necessarily a task, but they have it listed as a task. And then the last task, you move on to every day for every day with the loss, embracing the grief that you re-experience, because you will re-experience that loss kind of as you go through life. This is a very different process that I think a lot of therapists may not even have heard of if they haven't happened to go to that conference. What do you think as you go down through? And then we'll explain each kind of one of them as we go down through them.
Well, I'm big on thinking of something else that, in my mind, maybe not to no one else, but to me, it kind of sounds similar, and y'all are going to be probably snicker when I'm thinking of weight loss.
Okay.
Not
as long as you don't use a car again.
I'm going through another. I'm thinking of weight loss. That's something that a lot of people have a problem with.
It is. It's a very common challenge.
These steps here are actually what you would need to do to deal with that.
Okay. Interesting. I love what you're saying. I have a theory as to why that is the case. But what do you mean? Why? How can we apply this to weight loss?
Well, I'm talking about the ups and downs.
Yep.
The ups and downs. Why do people go up and down on that? They lose weight, they gain weight back. It's because they do the same things they used to do.
Yep.
They don't have a plan. They don't
major
stick to
behavioral change.
They don't create a ritual to bring and represent closure. They don't think about the meaning or impact of what losing that weight would do. I'm sitting there thinking, I know you're not talking about weight loss, but physical stuff here.
Well, what you have done is perfect for a part of a show, which this is going to be on, with grief, right? People don't think about, okay, so think about this. Uvalde, mass shooting event, you have freaking 22 funeral, 19 students and 2 adults, so 21 funerals to go to. That's a loss. People are going to be grieving. It's horrible. It's tragic. It's a tragic loss. Okay. Well, what about a grieving loss when you live in West Virginia all your life and you move out of that state for the first time and you find yourself living in North Carolina?
It'll be wonderful.
Yeah. I was grieving the loss of my mountaineer state, right? So when you talk about weight loss...
Don't listen to him, Julie.
I would love to be back in West Virginia. I would love to retire in there, but alas, the better half, I don't think that's going to work. But think about different types of losses that you can have, all sorts of losses that grief applies to. So when you talk about weight loss, you're not really grieving the loss of your weight and your body, but are you not maybe grieving the loss of the relationship that you have with food?
That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
I love food.
I do too.
I love to eat.
It's fun. We might do it here in a little bit.
I can lose weight, but man, I can gain it back too in a heartbeat.
Absolutely. And that is a primary issue. Hear me now with this. Like, it's a random extra bonus content, but that is a primary issue in weight loss, is not successfully dealing with your relationship with food, and the consequence is gaining, losing, exactly like being in recovery and then drinking again, being in recovery and drinking again. These guys, by the way, Curtin Cohen, MALPC, created this. I want to give proper credit since I'm doing this on a live show. I have it on my sheet. I kept it on there. So I don't know what company it was years ago that I got this, but Kirtan Cohen. You guys nailed it, because with all kinds of losses that we go through, not just with substance abuse rehab centers, weight loss centers could probably really benefit from this. And as an answer to the broken heart syndrome, this is
Dealing with
empowered
anything.
tasks that you can take. Yeah. Yeah. So let's go down through them real quick and spend a little bit of time so that there's a good understanding on each task, each step in that process. The first one, define the loss. Okay, that sounds simple, right? By the way, in my therapy work with people, I've kind of given this out and given this suggestion, and I'll give to you at home. Just take this sheet and take these steps, write them down if you don't have a chance to get to the internet to print it off, and just take each task and spend a piece of paper on it, right? And just write down your thoughts and go through the process. It's well worth your time if you're going through the loss of a son. Oh, gosh, right? Or any traumatic tragedy that you've had happen with a car wreck or, losses. Or it may sound simple, but if you're really wanting to do weight loss as you bring up, you might need to grieve the loss of the relationship with food. Take some time and take each one of these stages. Take a piece of paper to each one of them and spend some time with it. So, define the loss. Does that sound simple? How do you define the loss with... we should probably get a loss that people go through that's common. Maybe get away from death and begin to go through these stages. Help me out. What would be something that we might want to model this after?
Loss of job.
Perfect. Good. Okay. So you've had this career. It's a big part of your life. And you go through downsizing, which is a horrible time. People really struggle with that kind of a loss. I agree. Perfect example. They've come to therapy, initiated therapy for those kind of results, or those kind of events. Unemployment is terrible. So how do you define the loss when somebody gets, downsized, riffed, fired, or has that loss of a job? What's the definition of that? How do you define that?
I wouldn't think it had to be that in-depth as far as defining the loss. It's just a one-liner. What happened? What exactly is it you're trying to deal with?
Love it. I'm so glad you said that. Understand the value. The reason why I love this being on their task list is because if you don't spend a little bit of time and go further than just the event, your subconsciousness, your whole psychology knows that there's a whole lot more. And not realizing that absolutely creates different layers of grief that you will go through in your life. Real quick, here's what I mean by that is babies and not babies so much, but little kids at funerals do a lot better than adults at funerals. And everyone's always worried, like, oh, should we take the kid to see, grandma died or whatever? It's like, and I'm always like, yeah, absolutely. Because they usually handle grief a whole lot better than I or you do. You know why? Mm-hmm. Because when you go through a grief process, it takes some time, it takes a minute, weeks, months maybe, but you pack that away and you put it away. But then when you go through and you experience another grief event, you experience that loss for what that loss is and the one you didn't really
even if it's subconscious.
Totally comes up to the surface because you re-experience the same feelings. You do that enough times, by the time you're 40 years old and you have another loss of a family member, you're grieving the first one, the second one, the third, fourth, fifth, sixth. You've got layers of grief that have just totally built up. That's a thing. That's why grief becomes so difficult later on. And kids oftentimes, they're laughing and playing, they're sad, they're, they go through all kinds of emotions, but they usually handle it a lot better. So this is the same thing with defining the loss. If you don't define the fact that, yes, you lost your job, but you also lost your ability to travel to see your mom who lives in California. So I've lost a relationship with my mom for a period of time. Made that up, but it's part of what loses. I lost the dream of being able to get a car at midlife because I lost my job at age 40, and now I can't get the car that I really wanted.
I lost the company lease package on the car that... all kinds of things.
I lost the prestige of my position. I held value in the community. People looked up to me. So I lost my image, right? So there's other things associated to the event that is a simple death or a simple event. There's other things wrapped around that, and you have to pay attention, explore that a little bit, because you will find all kinds of meanings, right? If you're somebody dies, part of what, if I were to die today, part of defining the loss is my wife would say I lose the ability to be with my husband when my kids get married 10 years from now.
Okay.
That's a huge loss. That's a part of this event. It isn't just somebody died. It's, I've lost my retirement partner. I've lost the ability to go see Europe. Sadly enough, when that husband with the Uvalde teacher, he lost the ability to finish painting the back of his house with his wife. You don't think of that as the death, but it's a part of the loss. So there's a lot to define. Did I convince you?
Yep.
There's a whole lot more going on there that whether we realize it or not, our psychology knows that's there. And we're super, super emotional about those things. So we have to identify them. So there's a lot that goes into defining them. But we might not have enough time to go through all these things because there's a lot of process that goes on here. Let's move on. Exploring the meaning and the impact. Okay, well, so there's a definition, but what does that mean to you? Right? You have to spend a little bit of time of understanding the meaning here. Prestige with the job loss is probably a good example. Well, this means I'm not important to my neighbors. This means that I don't hold any value anymore because I can't do the service that I was doing in the community. That's a meaning that you carry with that loss. Other things might come to mind, but you begin to get the idea. Not only is there a loss, you have to define the different losses, and then you have to look at, what does this mean to me? It's an awesome therapy question.
It means I have to pay next time I go to the doctor's office. I don't have insurance anymore.
There you go. That's it. That's a consequence. It's a meaning, right? Thank you. Now, I think this one's cool. They had it on the third one here. They had it on their list, and it's a cool way of putting it. Now you have celebrations of life. That's what we do in the States. I don't know what death principles are around the world. There's different ways that you go about that. But exploring the beauty of the bond before the loss is a really cool way to celebrate the lasting reality that has in your life. The task here is to realize that this goes with you. Even in a job loss, the beauty of the bond with your position, even when it ends, that's still forever more moving forward, a part of your life and a part of the beauty of what you had there. That can be celebrated. That doesn't get lost. It's almost like a reversal of defining. Well, that's defining what's not lost. So I think that's an important part of grieving that I honestly, before this, I never would have thought of that before. Right? Finding your own unique way and pace is one of the last things they said on here. This is exhausting. This sounds and feels like a lot when you really examine these pieces. Look, just do it a little bit at a time. Take a piece of paper out and spend 20 minutes on it, and then put it down, put it away. You go through this process, a little bit, not all at once, so that what you're really trying to do is relieve pressure on your heart when you're looking at being a risk factor for, the broken heart syndrome. But let's move on. The last thing that I really want to spend a little bit of time on is creating a ritual to bring about and representing closure. Do you have any idea how important that would be to purposely create rituals? Does that make any psychological sense?
Yeah. One thing I did, I went through a divorce.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people's gone through losses like that. When I went through a divorce,
it's a huge loss.
It is. So, and sometimes a blessing, but
yes,
we won't get into that.
That side too.
Yeah. But it's still a loss. It's you're exposed to something totally different.
Real quick, I'm glad you said that because sometimes we have losses of things that we choose to lose that's positive, like alcohol, if we're an addict. So when you go through things that you want to have out of your life, you're exactly right. That's still a loss.
But one thing I did, my ritual that I went through, somebody at work had bought me some tea,
Okay.
hot tea.
All right.
So I went for a while there. They had I think it's like a 60 pack or whatever.
yeah.
So every morning before I went to work, I made me some hot tea and sat down and drank it.
I love that.
That was 2 months.
Yeah. That's yeah.
That's 2 months worth.
Yeah.
And it got to be, I'm in bed. I'm like, I'm gonna get up and drink me that tea.
Yeah. And that was a time that you used what? Were you reflecting, or were you kind of just thinking?
Just kind of waking up and just
yeah.
wanting to get up and do something.
It was a ritual. A new
a ritual that I did, and I was like a week into it before I realized it. And then you're like, I'm not laying in bed. I'm gonna get up and drink my tea.
I think that's
I'm kinda gonna
fantastic.
sit there.
You got to understand that when we do things like that, you create actions, you create rituals. There's a reason why rituals have been a part of human existence since the beginning of humans' time, right? Because there's an emotional process that when you take an action to do something, you end up and result in, sometimes a negative, but more times than not, a positive emotion of letting go, representing closure, representing I do something differently now. My spouse is gone. I have tea, and I have tea every morning to get through and move through to start the day. That's huge. It's really important to have those types of routine and structure. And this, I just participated in a really powerful ritual that was created by my dear friend Aaron Clark. He's a friend of the show. Hey, Aaron, shout out to you, brother. He was on the show episode 3, and he's the person who had his 13-year-old son die tragically, suddenly, because of an AVM. I don't know. I forget what AVM stands for. But for the 4th time, we got together at the funeral, not the funeral home, the graveyard, and did a balloon release. And he has done this 4 times now, years in a row. We also get together for his birthday.
Each year?
Each year he has done this. And this year we had cookies instead of cupcakes.
So that's kind of his ritual.
It is absolutely a created ritual, and then the next task is carry it out with loved ones or friends, so that you're not alone with it. But powerful, powerful experience listening to him read a letter and share cookies and have balloons that we all release at the same time, and just, see, I could almost get tearful about it, see, the balloon kind of go up in the sky thinking that it's, going up with Cody. Because I was close to Cody. I knew this kid.
Right.
It brings emotion. It allows you to process what it is that you're feeling, and creates a sense of closure. And in this way, he's done it multiple times, creates a sense of connection to that which was lost. I'm telling you, it's powerful. It's a powerful emotional reality when you do these kind of rituals. And they could be anything. I love your tea example. I mean, write a letter and burn it in your sink. I had a client.
Write a letter and burn it in your sink?
Yeah, burn it,
I've never heard that one.
Yeah, you can burn it in your yard, whatever, if you're in the house. But I had somebody that did a ritual where they wrote things on a personal friend of mine. She was going through a divorce as well, and she had a lot of energy and anger and emotions with it, and she wrote messages on Chinaware. She went to buy cheap Chinaware at some...
And smash it or
and
what?
Threw it in her garage, man.
You're the worst.
Oh, yeah. It was such a release for her to do that. Powerful, powerful experiences when you engage in a ritual that you create. Now, she didn't do it with anybody around, thankfully, I guess. That might have been dangerous, but grief and loss, a hell of a thing. Anything else on there that I didn't cover? Your own unique way of pace, moving the life beyond the loss, so you'll have to revisit stuff as life goes through. But that's a pretty cool way of going through a grief process. What do you think?
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine yourself kind of taking some time and going through some of that?
Mm-hmm. Everybody has.
I think there's an avoidance, because when you really take that time and spend the invested energy there, dude, I don't want to feel all these feelings. I don't want to go through that. One of the tasks, I don't think it's a task, I think it's a message. understand the cost of the ungrieved loss. They have it as like task number 3 or whatever. You know, I describe that when you go through loss and you just sort of pack it away. That's what most people try to do, I think. Let me just recover. Let me just get, back to balanced life. Let me just try to get back to work. And you'll do that, and that's fine. But understand that what you carry with you comes with you in life. You know what phrase I hate is time heals all wounds. I just think that's completely garbage when we say that to people. And it does a bit of a disservice. It's just, I'm 100% clear in my mind. Like, you're going to do one of two things. And it's going to take time to do one of those two things. You're either going to go through a process to deal with the emotions and kind of manage things and whatever, and resolve them to a place where gradually it gets easier to manage. Or 2, you're going to compact it, suppress it, and numb it out. And you'll move on life, and you'll be okay. Time doesn't do crap.
Well, let's change it.
How can you change it?
Let's say, in time, all wounds will heal.
Yeah, I like that amendment. Maybe in time you can heal your wounds. I don't know, right? Like, I like to take action. I like to feel empowered. I like to try to control the things I can control, which is myself, and I can control my emotions. I can control my feelings. It's difficult. It's scary to do that sometimes, but I want to take the time and make the investment to heal what it is that I've lost. How about that? Sounds a little bit wordy, but yeah. Yeah, this is as close to the grief show, I think. We have to, maybe I need to retitle this a little bit so we can make sure that this highlights grief a little bit. I don't know. The broken heart syndrome and the grief process. We'll probably make that as the title. So, any closing thoughts, questions, Adam? I think we running up on time to get out of here.
You got everything covered, looks like to me.
I appreciate you listening. I know this was probably a little bit weird for you I feel like I did a lot of talking, but listen, if you've got a grief event, like I said out there, I really want you to not feel alone. That's probably another thing to highlight, to not be isolated, not be alone, to go through this process with loved people around you. I know our country's hurting in a lot of ways. A lot of people over in Ukraine, around the world. I mean, my God, can you imagine the terrible heartbreak that's going on there? Horror realities around the world that we're dealing with in such difficult times coming out of the pandemic. Hopefully you understand that you can take some tasks, that you can work with your process, you can manage your feelings so that we don't lose people to the broken heart syndrome. Take care of yourself, grieve. It's manageable. There is hope. You will recover. Okay? The last thing I'll say there, in a sense of hopefulness, is we're developing some platform. You will hear this in the future. This will not defeat me. I think it's a cool title that we're working with. Understand and know that this will not defeat you in the tough time that you're having. Take care and be well. We'll talk to you soon.